IMHO Talk Show.
IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles.
Smacks.
Razor.
That's right. Back one more again. Top of the hour, bottom of the show. In Seville world. Glad you're here with us because you could be anywhere else. But
that's right.
It's good because we have none other than the highly esteemed great herself, Sally Hudson. Sally Hudson, good afternoon to you.
Always great to be with you.
Always a pleasure, and love to see that you are still on the battlefield because you definitely have a heart for the community and do great work. So you're much appreciated. And you know, as we've been saying, you know, Max and Razor, this is yet another election year. You know, it can't be understated that it may be one of the biggest. And you know, Sally's here in particular to talk about something called ranked choice voting. There's even an initiative right now, Ranked Choice Virginia. And so, and we're going to get into even how at a recent city council meeting, local Charlottesville government has approved ranked choice voting for local elections. And as I understand, it's been done in a couple of other jurisdictions as well. So we're going to break it down because there's a lot of questions, Sally, as I'm sure you imagine. And you already know that because you came with a pamphlet.
That's right. I come prepared.
Whenever somebody make a pamphlet, that means y'all don't understand.
Right.
Yeah. There's going to be questions. That's why we're here.
Yeah. But before we do that, though, so it's 2024, Sally, and we're approaching a massive critical election. And, you know, it's a presidential election, you know, amongst other things. And, you know, like I get disturbed because so many times we look at the presidential elections like they are like they mean so much more. And a lot of times, so many people, it's the only time they pay attention to elections.
That's right.
You know, and I know you're one, you've been on here before talking about the importance of local elections. But that being the case, 2024 kind of just shed your hopes, sort of your encouragement, you know, to our listening voters when it comes to the importance of this election this year.
Well, there's so much on the ballot this fall, whether we're talking about president or the folks running for Senate and the U.S. Congress. There's so much that gets done at the local level that affects our lives, like our schools. But there's an awful lot that happens in Washington, D.C. that affects our daily lives as well, whether you're talking about healthcare or housing or all the support we need to get entrepreneurs and small businesses off the ground. So whoever you are, wherever you are, there's something on the ballot that matters to you this fall.
That's right. Very well said. All right. So you ready to get into it, Max?
Let's go.
Speaking of what's on the ballot. So ranked choice voting. I guess, Sally, before we even dig into like that itself, first kind of start us with the beginning of this journey leading to getting it enacted, because you were present at Charlottesville City Council meetings, right? So kind of tell us how this initiative, you know, first came to be, and then, you know, how it led you to Charlottesville, and then now what does this mean for our voting populace?
So this has been a long time project for me. I've been at this now for going on 6 or 7 years. This was, for me, my top priority as a policy project coming out of the 2016 election.
Okay.
Because we saw an election that was so divisive, where we had candidates really just trying to tear the country apart. And a lot of people were asking, what can we do about that? There's got to be a better way to go about politics. And in my mind, ranked choice voting is the answer to that question.
Okay.
If you are new to ranked choice voting, we say it's easy as 1, 2, 3. In a ranked choice election, you don't just vote for one candidate. You get to rank them in the order that you like them. So you get a first choice, you get a second choice, and you get a third choice. And then when all those ballots are cast, we start by counting up all the first choices. And if somebody's got majority support from the community, if they've actually won broad support, then they win the election. If you got somebody who's got 60% of the votes, they're in. That's the winner. But if nobody has clear support from the breadth of the community, then we knock off the lowest vote getter and we ask those voters, who was your second choice? Who's your backup? And we transfer their support to their second choice candidate. We call it an instant runoff. And it keeps going until you get down to a head-to-head between the top two, and you find the person who genuinely has support from the part of the community. And in that way, ranked choice voting really encourages candidates to reach out to a broader range of voters to try to build coalitions and bring people together around community priorities. And it gives voters way more power at the ballot box. Because I think we all know what it feels like when you go in to vote sometimes and you feel torn between getting to vote for who you really like and voting for somebody who you think can win. And ranked choice voting solves that problem. You never have to worry about wasting your vote on somebody who might not be the front runner for everybody else. You get to put your favorite first, And if it turns out that not everybody agrees with you on that, and that candidate gets knocked out, you will still get a say in the final decision. And so you don't ever have to feel that tension between voting your conscience and voting for somebody who you think can win.
Okay. Now, tell us about your presence within Charlottesville City Council. Is this something that's being supported by our delegates and our representatives? Because I'm curious on the significance of Charlottesville versus it being maybe like a wider push, maybe like for our district, for instance, instead of Charlottesville.
Great question. Yeah. So states that have adopted ranked choice almost always start at the local level because it is different. It is a shift. And so communities try it for city council, they try it for mayor, for county board, and then it grows up for there. So for example, in Maine, they now use ranked choice voting for all their elections, all the way on up to president. But it started back in 2011 when Portland, Maine started using it to elect their mayor. And within a decade, they were using it for everything. So we think about what's going on in Charlottesville as a pilot project. What has happened here is that city council has adopted an ordinance that would make us use ranked choice voting for next year's city council election in June of 2025. So if you are focused on how you're voting this fall, what's on your ballot in November, this is not yet. This is something that's coming down the road next year. But if you're an early bird, if you're paying attention, now's a good time to start talking about it. We will use this to vote for city council in the primaries next June. And the hope is for people like me who've been working on this for a long time is that we can do what Maine did and build this up from the local level, get communities like Charlottesville, like Arlington, which already does this, that are a little more forward thinking, a little more willing to be on the cutting edge, get used to it here, get comfortable, and then try to grow from there.
Okay. And so in terms of runoff votes, are the runoff votes a whole vote to your second selection, or is it a percentage of that vote that runs off?
Great question. It depends on how many people you're electing.
Okay.
So if it's a single winner race, like somebody's running for president or somebody's running for Congress, then the number of votes you need to win is half. You need to get more than half the votes. And in that case, everybody gets exactly one vote. But if you're electing more than one person, if you're doing city council, for example, where we sometimes have 2 or 3 seats open at the same time, then it gets a little more complicated. And I think this is what that you are hinting at. In a ranked choice election with more than one seat, you don't need half the votes to win. If you've got 2 seats up, you only need a third of the votes to win. And the reason why is that if you're trying to elect 2 people and you found 2 people who each have more than a third, then nobody else can have more than them because there's only 3/3 out there. So if you 2 have more than a third, then you can't have more than a third as well. So we know these 2 are the favorites. And Max is introducing this idea of what happens to a fraction of a vote. Suppose that you are the front runner and you need a third of the votes to win, but you actually get 40% of the votes. Then there's people who voted for you. You've got more support than you need. And we want to make sure that those people, those extra votes, those surplus votes can still be part of choosing the next person. And so in an election with more than 2 people, that extra slice, that 7 over a third is going to get redistributed to their next choices. So it does get a little more complicated when you've got more than one person that's going to get elected. That's why we usually start by teaching people the single winner version, because the ballot is the same for you either way. If you're a voter, you are doing first choice, second choice, third choice. And what we do with those extra votes, if you've got more than one person up, is all handled by the computer. It doesn't change your incentives as a voter to express your preferences.
Now, that's the part that kind of gets me.
Yeah, that's right.
Now I'm not a math whiz. I'm gonna put that up front, right? But is there a scenario? Like, could there be a scenario? Because I imagine that the brain trust behind this has weighed all the potential scenarios. So I'm curious if there could be a scenario to where my number one choice would have won if I did not pick a second choice, meaning that if I would not have given a vote to my second choice, they maybe wouldn't have had enough votes to win. Does that make sense?
That's a perfect question, and that is exactly the problem that ranked choice solves.
Okay.
In a ranked choice election, you never have to worry about hurting your favorite by using your second or your third votes. And that's not true with our elections right now.
Okay.
If you are used to thinking about how we currently vote for city council, you've got one column on the ballot, and when there's 3 seats up, you get to bubble in 3 people. But if you've got someone who you really like, who you're really committed to seeing that person on council, you will sometimes see voters or candidates encourage you to single shot and only use 1 vote. Because if Razor's my favorite and I want to make sure that he gets in, if I give any more support to you two, I'm like raising the bar that Razor has to meet. And so you can risk diluting your vote, watering down the power of your vote for your favorite by using your other 2. And there's no reason we should do that to voters, to make them have to play games with their ballot and decide what's the most powerful way to express my preferences. That's why in a ranked choice election, when you say Razor's my favorite and you're my backup, your support will only start transferring to your backup once your favorite has won. We keep your whole vote with your favorite candidate until they have secured their spot. And only if they have more support than they need does your extra support start transferring to your second choice. And that's what makes the ballot more powerful for the voter, is it holds out for your favorite as long as they're still in the running. If they get knocked out, if they get eliminated, then your vote goes to your second choice. But as long as they're still in it, your vote stays with them.
I have a question for you. I know you say how you described that, but doesn't this also eliminate the power of like the big dollar? Yeah, I mean, you know what I'm getting at, right?
Say more.
Okay. I like it because I've seen people go out here and they got influential friends that have big, deep pockets and they control everything. They got more signs in the yard. They got more, so a lot of people feel like, okay, that must be the candidate because I see them everywhere. You know what I'm saying? We were riding through the county where I'm from and it looked like the big signs that you saw looked like everybody was for Trump. And I explained to my wife, like, no, that's just for the farmers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of land in Orange County. So you see these signs, but they're only for the farmers. But that's not the majority of how, my county feels, I think. So when I see ranked choice voting, doesn't it dilutes the power of just the big dollar because you get more than 1 vote, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, the candidates who are most advantaged by ranked choice voting are the coalition builders. Because if you think about what this does to how you run as a candidate, I may not be your favorite. There may be somebody else on the ballot who's your number 1, but I still want to reach out and be your number 2. And so like maybe there's somebody else who's running and your number 1 thing is education and there's a teacher on the ballot. And you're like, I'm going to put that person first. But you could have somebody else say, I love what she's doing on education. Can I talk to you about my transit policy? I'm super focused on wanting to get bus lines and on this, that, and the other street. And so you have you are encouraged to acknowledge what you have in common with other people. And even if you can't be somebody's number 1, you want to work and be their number 2. And so that encourages the people who do the more grassroots campaigns, the ones who are out there talking to a lot of people and bringing people together, as opposed to just like, trying to create the most visible presence. And a bunch of people don't know why they're voting for them at all.
Right.
Yeah. It's a lot to understand.
It's a shift for sure. That's why we're getting started early. I'm not going to pretend like this is obvious and immediate.
Yeah. So let's talk about the community engagement that has been done to hear from the people that this is going to directly affect about whether or not they were or are interested in ranked choice voting that led up to ultimately the approval by City Council.
I think that's a great question. And to be honest, I was a little frustrated that City Council did not do a more robust engagement process in advance of the vote.
Okay.
They first gave their indication that they supported this back in February.
Okay.
And in February, that was when the registrar came to a City Council meeting and she said, we can do this if you want. Like, we've got the technology. We can do what Arlington did. We have the logistics in place. And at that time, as somebody who cares really deeply about ranked choice, I was really encouraging them to do what Arlington did, which was then to open a big public comment period and say, we want to hear from the residents about this. And I was kind of nudging them on the side and being like, hey, you want to hear from people before you do this? And they're like, we're good. We got, we got the information we need. We came up to the vote in August. That was, they put the resolution up and everybody said, oh yeah, we still support it. Let's do this. And then about a week before the final vote, they came to the realization that you did, which is like, hey, we didn't actually do a structured process to hear from people about this. We heard from people with strong feelings, and all those people were supportive, but we didn't really proactively reach out. I wish they had.
Okay.
But I think that the saving grace here is that this is just a pilot. It's just for next year's primary. There's going to be a lot of community engagement between now and next June. Hopefully it will go well. But if it doesn't, it's not a permanent switch. And if the feedback from the community is, hey, this isn't really what we want to stick with, then we can always reassess them. But I do wish they had done more engagement on the front end.
Let's talk about the equipment. You mentioned that in your response just now. And I know there's this issue of certified versus approved voting equipment. And people have concerns one way or another. Can you explain that to us?
Oh, it's an interesting question. So the state code, go way back on this. Part of the reason this is legal in Virginia is because I carried legislation on it in the General Assembly back in 2020 to give cities the right to do this. And there is a part of state code that describes how the state approves equipment that you use in elections. And that chapter, that like paragraph, uses both the word certified and approved. And the state's attorneys will tell you that they're synonyms. They're like, these two words mean the same thing. For a while, our registrar was concerned that they don't mean the same thing. We got a bunch of lawyers involved. They came back and said, these two words mean the same thing. So it was a fair question to ask. I'm glad that our registrar raised the question. I think having a very detail-oriented registrar is a good thing. But ultimately, we got all the people together to say, hey, it's annoying that chapter in the state code uses two words for the same idea, but ultimately, as far as the state's attorneys are concerned, it's the same thing.
So I have a question, and I think, well, maybe just a little clarification, because maybe this answers even what I was asking earlier. See, I knew the pamphlet would come in handy. See, I'm over here reading. So the rounds, and I think this kind of feeds off of Max's point too when you talk about the equipment and stuff. So what does the rounds look like, and how does this impact the polling places? Because I'm curious, on sort of the sanctity of that, because we already live in a time where everybody's questioning how many fake votes there are and all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious if you could break down like what the rounds look like, the impact on the polling places, and if this is carbon copy. You said it was Vermont or Maine? Maine. Yeah. So I wonder if this is carbon copy of what Maine does, or is it adjusted for Virginia?
So your experience as a voter will be the same. You'll go to your same polling place. You'll get a ballot printed out just like you currently do. It'll have first choice, second choice, third choice on it. It'll look a little different for the printing, but you'll feed it into the same machine and it'll get scanned exactly the same way. So there is now software that the state approved and certified and now makes available to the localities for tabulating the votes. And all that happens by computer. I mean, they literally just take the same information out the back end of the scanning machines and they use a laptop to count up all the votes. So at this point, the technology handles all the time cost of it. But your paper ballot experience is exactly the same as it will be now.
Okay. But I'm curious about the polling place, because is it a literal round where what happens in round one? Because I noticed it's saying your first choice is counted in round one. What does that look like?
So all of that happens instantly. Like this calculation of how many people got first choice votes, that happens in a second on the computer, and then they immediately transfer all the support. It just looks different when they publish the results. Because instead of there just being one column that says, ABC got this many votes, you see a column for the first round, and then you see that candidate eliminated, and then you see the next rounds. In fact, I can pull it up on a computer. It's real easy to see. It's a super, one of the things that's challenging about talking about on the radio is it's a super visual concept. And that's partly why it's so important to get out in the community and talk with people. And in particular, to practice, like get a real ballot, make a real decision, see the results. And once you get that feedback loop, then it tends to click for folks.
Yeah, and we did put the ranked choice va.org on the post as well, as people can go to the website. But thank you for explaining that, because that definitely cleared a lot up for me, like understanding, on how that first choice in round one works. And I think that may be a critical understanding for a lot of people, for them to get like, oh, okay. So that's how my first choice still really, really matters. You know?
And sometimes you'll hear people call it an instant runoff because it does happen instantly. Okay. It's not like people, it's just like what you see in a lot of southern states where they have real runoff elections where like everybody votes and then they find the top two and they drag everybody back to the polls and they vote just between the two of them. Like they do that in Georgia, they do it in Louisiana, a couple other states. But that's a real big waste of time and money. And often people don't hear about the second election. And so you see drop off, you see folks not come back. There's no reason we have to drag everybody back to do a runoff election. Like it's 2024. We've been doing bubble tests our whole lives. And the computers can scan that up and just do it automatically. So it's a big time saver.
So I can imagine, to Razor's point too, that the issue with the big dog candidate, the one with the most money or whatever the case is, not liking this. Because I was going to ask you like why, or what's the reason where maybe some of your colleagues are against this. And I can imagine that's probably the main reason. And so like, are you hopeful though that this can reach across the aisle and like people would support this? Or is it like, if you're a big money candidate, there's no reason you would support this?
Well, I think it's important because you said both reach across the aisle, which is about parties and people and coalitions. Okay. And then there's money, and there's big money in both parties. And that's what I love about this is it encourages people to build coalitions that are rooted in the voters and not so much rooted in the donors. And I think what you're hitting on, like why might some people oppose this, is all about something rooted in our current election system that we don't think too hard about, but it can be really problematic. If you think about our current city council election system, where when there's 2 seats up, everybody gets 2 votes and the person with the most vote wins. That sounds easy. It sounds simple. The people with the most votes wins. But there's no requirement that those people have broad support. The people with the most votes could just be 40% of the population, and everybody else could be split across some other options. But just because they were the biggest, often because they were the front runner, they had the biggest campaign, they could get the most votes, just from their base. They didn't actually have to reach out to a broader range of people. And that's what big money does in elections. Like, especially if you see, 4 or 5 candidates on the ballot, there's often one front runner and they're going to, get ahead, and then all the other people are going to split up the votes. This solves that problem. And so if you're somebody who wants the voters to be more empowered with more options, if you want the candidates to be encouraged to build those coalitions, then this is something that could excite you.
So in your opinion, is it solving a problem that Charlottesville is having? And this is why I asked this. I think what's on a lot of people's minds is whether or not we are doing away with, at least for the upcoming local primary, doing away with the system that is in fact broken for us, right? And I'm listening to the things that you say ranked choice voting fixes. But is Charlottesville dealing with the situation where we have several candidates running for council and, something like ranked choice voting would help us to be able to sort out our picks? Are we dealing with the vitriol in the campaigns that we're seeing at the presidential election or presidential level? I haven't necessarily seen that, but doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Are we in some way kind of blocking? Charlottesville claims to be Democratic. Everyone that sits on council claims to be Democratic. So does ranked choice voting solve a problem by blocking out one political party versus another? So
you asked so many good questions. Yeah, you asked so many good questions there, and I'm going to try to hit on several of them. The first is what's the problem that this is solving in Charlottesville? And I told you that this is something that I've been working on for like 6 or 7 years. So go back to the council race of 2017. That fall, there were 3 main candidates on the ballot. There was Nakai Walker, there was Heather Hill, and there was Amy Lawford.
3
that
women.
Was a great example. 3 women.
And a minority woman.
And a great example of a race where 2 people were going to come out and candidates were telling people to single shot. They were out there telling voters, you should only use one of your votes because you want to make sure you elect me. And ranked choice voting solves that problem. So that for me was the inspiration when I saw that at the local level. It has taken a while to get us here because we had to go to Richmond to get the legal support. We had to get all the technology ready in Virginia. We have not seen a recent election that had that same sort of single shotting dynamic where voters had to choose between using all of their votes and only using one. But it could easily happen again, given the way that our votes are currently structured. And there's no reason we got to do that to voters. Like, I often have people ask me when they're going to the polls, they're like, I get 3 votes. Am I supposed to use all of my 3 votes? Or like, does that hurt me or help me? Like, that doesn't have to be a problem. Just tell people to rank them in the order that you like them. So there's that piece, which is, when's the last example we had? Yeah. And I would say there are lots of other things that we can do besides this to encourage more people to run for Charlottesville City Council. In particular, I'm personally very supportive of the measure that they recently passed to raise the salary, because I think that serving on council is out of reach for a lot of people financially. So there's other things that we can do. I think there are other things we can do to make public service more accessible for a wider range of people.
But you think this will bring out more candidates?
I don't think in this city that's going to be one of the consequences. Okay. I think that can happen in other elections. I don't think that's what's holding more people back from running in Charlottesville. But you said something that I want to get back to, which is about the partisan dimensions. Right now, we have a Democratic primary and a general election, but the general almost never matters. Like, that election between Nikia Walker and Heather Hill and Amy Lawford was one of the last times that a general really mattered in Charlottesville City Council. Usually the Democratic primary is basically the whole show. Cities that adopt ranked choice voting will often get rid of their primaries and just do one election in the fall, because you don't have that problem with the vote splitting. Like, you've got a way to handle what happens if a lot of people run. And I think that has a lot of benefits. One, it shortens the campaign for people who want to run. And I think that draws out more candidates. I think it's expensive to run for 11 months. I think, saying you got to do this for 4 months between July and November is like more manageable for people. I think it puts the candidates in front of more people. I think if you hold an election in June, it's only people who are really plugged in who vote. Like, a lot of people don't know that they need to vote in June. And so they miss out on that. And that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing if candidates have to talk to the widest range of people possible. And so that prospect of combining ranked choice with moving to council elections in November that mattered, instead of just having them be a foregone conclusion, that could be a really powerful thing. Like, imagine if all the people who were going to show up to vote this fall were also going to be voting on city council, and that hadn't already just been decided back in June in a quieter election that fewer people paid attention to. I think we might have counselors working harder to pay attention to issues that appeal to a wider range of people.
But the more elections I have, the more money I can raise, Sally.
Oh, see, now you understand the industry, right? In Virginia, we have elections every year. We have primaries every June. You're doing elections basically every 6 months. There's a lot of money in that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are talking none other than Miss Sally Hudson with Ranked Choice Virginia. And that website is rankedchoiceva.org. So we, for some reason this made me think of this. I'm curious your thought on this. Do you think this could lead into back, I guess this may have been like around the Federalist days of when your second choice in a federal election was the vice president? Do you think something like this kind of stems from that?
That's an interesting historical play. Yeah. I mean, I think if my memory is right, the reason we moved to tickets instead of having the second vote getter be the VP is that it turns out the VP and the president have got to be on the same page. Like, it's a pretty dysfunctional thing in terms of their job duties if those two are like at each other's throats. And so we decided that we're going to elect both executive positions on a ticket so that those people are on the same page. And so that I think was solving a different problem. Gotcha. But I think what you're raising is a good question, and that I hope that the ranked choice conversation opens up, is there's a lot of things that we've been doing in this country with elections that may or may not make sense, and we just don't talk about it. And there's a lot of systems, like whether it's the Electoral College, whether it's single choice elections, all of that. And in the U.S., we've often been taught to say that American democracy is like the shining example, and you couldn't possibly tinker with it. And I think we are in a place in our politics where people are tinkering. Like, this may sound new to us. Australia has been voting this way for a century. Ireland has been doing it for almost that long. And now cities across the country and in the U.S. are doing it too. Whether or not you think this is the right way to go, I hope that you're one of the people who's thinking we have options. There are other systems we could be using to meet all of these needs, and I'm glad those conversations are happening.
Yeah. So we have a question for a listener. You want to go first, though?
Yeah. When Sally, when you said something about choices, right? I tend to see back in history books where when we have choices, the opposition steps up to try to limit how people can vote. They start coming up with, I'm gonna check your driver's license. Are you a citizen? Are you, do you have any felonies? Like all these different type things. Yeah. What safety measures can we put in to where people have, let's say people that's been previously incarcerated, they got their rights back, right? And now that person may have a real impact in voting. Because they're like, a lot of people say, man, I'm not voting for nobody because I don't like either candidate, right? But now you have somebody that you might like that actually stands a chance because everybody votes them as number 2 and they actually end up with more votes. Yeah. What safety measures can we put in that protect the voter? Because I want choices. I want the ability to have my voice heard, but I don't want to be beat up every day trying to get that point. I don't want to be the one walking across Selma Bridge. I don't want to be the one attacked by the German Shepherd. They might not actually use the actual dog now. Yeah. They might have it to where they do things to where, okay, we're having a city election, so I'm going to raise the rent so high that you have to move outside of the city. Yeah. So, they're smart. People are smart. So what things can we do along with all the legislation that you're doing that protects the voter as well?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I actually just yesterday, I was downtown talking with a lawyer here in town who runs voter protection statewide for Virginia. And she talks a lot about what that looks like now. Like, it may not be a policeman with a dog, but there are still some precincts where you will see law enforcement come park outside of the polling place. And just that presence makes that place feel less welcoming to some people who have every right to be inside casting their ballot. And so that is what voter protection lawyers do, is that they spend all of their time thinking about all of the little ways that we can make someone disenfranchised. I mean, I remember an interaction I had during my last election that will forever live in my mind was when they changed the polling place in Tonsler Park. Remember that small building is not a great room to have to get a bunch of people into. And so when they drew the new precincts, they split it up now. And some people voted Buford and some people voted Johnson. And an older woman came to Tonsler to vote. And I happened to be there at the time and was saying, ma'am, we have new polling places. Can I help you? What's your address? Can we help you find where you're going to? And she was like, sweetheart, I've been voting here longer than you've been alive. Do not tell me my polling place has moved. Like, I know people play tricks like that, right? And I could hear like the fear and the genuine, both like well-earned wisdom that something wasn't right. And we ended up getting her to the right polling place. But I was like, I'm going to let you Google this yourself. I'm going to let you find your way to the .gov website yourself, look up your address yourself, and know that the government is telling you this is your new polling place.
Can you vote if you've been drinking or smoked marijuana?
The only thing that would remove your voting rights is a felony conviction.
No, I'm talking about like when you said the police are at the, like, make it intimidating.
Oh,
if I smell like, if I've had a drink, right? Or if I've been smoking marijuana, can that be a reason that they can stop you or mess with you and not allow you to vote?
Not legally. There's no law that says you have to be sober to vote. But if you've got a cop who's outside and somebody knows that they may be intoxicated, then you could wonder whether they feel comfortable passing that vehicle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Reza is definitely on the same trajectory as this listener that we have. But Max, you want to go though?
No, I was just going to say, I'm even thinking about the person who needs someone to go back to the voting booth with them, because I just don't understand this and whether or not something like that would be allowed and how that can turn into a situation.
Oh, yeah. Great question. So absolutely. And whether that is somebody who's just not used to it and has questions, whether you've got somebody who's got a disability accommodation, that is exactly the work that the registrars do to accommodate every voter. So, for example, sometimes you'll have older folks whose hands aren't as steady as they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so filling in a bubble may be easy to us, but it's not easy to everybody. And so they can have either a friend or a family member go back with them, or they can have a polling staffer go. And there's procedures in place so that if you need somebody else's help to fill out your ballot, if you've got people who have visual limitations, like they can't read as well, just because they can't see the small print, like you can have assistance. And in particular, one of the most important investments that the city is going to make in this election that they've already allocated funding for is extra staff at polling places on election day, because people are going to have more questions the first time.
You said something when you talked about filling in the bubble. So this election system is not going to be electronic. So you won't be completing that on a computer screen, right? You'll actually be filling in what we call a Scantron sheet or whatnot, and then inserting it into the reader.
Yep. Just like your all paper ballots. In Virginia, we have all paper ballots. And that means that if there ever has to be a recount, you can do it by hand.
Okay.
Gotcha. So Sally, I guess we kind of wrap it up. I have a listener who's going to stretch you a little bit. They're elaborating on the importance and how this sounds like how this can impact disfranchised voters.
Okay.
So let me just read through. So it says, what are your thoughts on the homelessness crisis downtown? What is a policy that you would like to see implemented regarding homelessness on a national level? So that's kind of one part. But then they elaborate and says, what are we doing to encourage the inclusion of the unhoused population's votes? And do their voices not count? Candidates campaign all over the country, but we haven't seen their focus on low-income housing developments and their residents. Understanding that financial support is a big part of campaigns, but knowing that the votes are what elects the candidates, why is that we are not campaigning in Black neighborhoods?
So there's a lot in there. Let me go for the first part. Okay. At the local level, I think the most important thing that we need is a year-round, broad access shelter, because we've got shelters that are only available sometime in the year. We've got shelters with a lot of restrictions on who can and cannot be inside. And I think that everything I'm hearing from City Manager Sanders says that there's a big project in the pipeline, and I'm looking to him for more information about what the next steps look like. You asked what we can do to encourage more voting participation by unhoused residents. I think one of the most important things we can do, Virginia did very recently, and that is adopt same-day registration. Same-day registration means that you can roll up to a polling place on election day and register on the spot. And so they will talk to you about, where is your current place of residence like tonight? Where are you laying your head tonight? And you can vote. And that is a critical thing to do for people who have unstable housing.
They just need photo ID, I'm assuming?
You don't need a photo ID. Okay. You need some kind of documentation, but you can swear an affidavit. Okay. So we actually have a new system as well, where if you do not have ID on you, you can cast what's called a provisional ballot. Okay. And that means that they'll set your set ballot aside, and you have a set number of days to work with them to confirm your ID. And they have a lot of different ways that you can do it, whether it's like utility bill, just something that links your name to your person. And once you've done that confirmation process, then they count your ballot. Okay. The same day registration is huge for a lot of people. Okay. It's huge for students. Like, we'll see thousands of students at PVCC and UVA cast same day ballots this year, because they will have missed the deadline. They moved into a new apartment, whatever, and they'll need to change their registration on the spot. It's been huge in towns with a lot of young people.
Okay. And one other thing that I pulled from this is that sounds like maybe a question could be, do you feel like this will encourage more votes? Because we do know that a lot of times Black communities like only get spoken to or visited when I need your vote. Yeah. Right. If we're honest about it. So do you feel like that even maybe ranked choice voting could maybe encourage more voting from those particular communities?
So I would love, I know that we're maybe beginning to run out of time, but I would love to send y'all some more information about that. There is fantastic evidence coming out of the big cities who have adopted this, that ranked choice voting is a game changer for the election of candidates of color and female candidates.
Female for sure.
And what we hear a lot from the female candidates is that they are coalition builders. They are the people who like to go out and say, You should like me because of schooling. You should like me because of buses. You should like me because of housing. And so the female candidates have really thrived in this environment. New York City, biggest, most diverse city in the country. It's bigger than Virginia. There's more people in New York City than there are in all of Virginia. So their city council is basically like a state legislature. It's got 51 members. When they first went to ranked choice voting in 2001, they, for the first time in history, elected a majority female city council. 31 of their 51 members were women, and vast majority women of color, like 26, I think, of those 31 women were women of color, which means that body now looks like that city. Like the people who live and make up New York City now feel represented on their city council. First Black mayor of Minneapolis was elected via ranked choice. Just like across the country, you see that. And I think in particular, often female candidates or candidates of color are some of the biggest victims of that vote splitting problem. Like, because two people step up to run at the same time and they get told, how could voters possibly tell you apart? One of you needs to get out of the race. I think in particular about our last election for governor, when we had two Black women on the ballot in the Democratic primary, they were both named Jennifer. And people were like, how could you possibly tell the difference between Jen McClellan and Jen Carroll Foy? If you know them personally, they're very different human beings. Those are not the same people. But they were running against Terry McAuliffe. And so many people told them, one of you has got to get out of the race. Like, if either of you has any chance of winning, one of you has to drop out. You need to get in a room and sort that out. And we don't need to do that anymore. We don't need those decisions to be made in smoky back rooms. They can be made at the ballot box. And you can have people show up and say, JCF is my favorite, Jen McClellan's my backup, and then Terry McAuliffe. Or you can have somebody else have it the other way. Like, we don't need to make those decisions for the voters. We can let the voters have a say in that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
What you think, Max?
Yeah, I did have one final question, but it can be for another day. But I'm thinking about redistricting as this trickles up, and what impact or how does this change the game when it comes to that?
Oh, I love these questions. You guys have great intuition for where all this can go. So redistricting is all about putting people in boxes. You got red people and blue people, and you're trying to draw the lines so there's the right number of red people and blue people in each box so that your team wins, right? This means there's more kind of people in the world. With ranked choice voting, there's not just red people and blue people. Maybe there's purple people, there's green people, there's orange people. There's more than just two kinds of people in the world. So ranked choice voting can really reduce gerrymandering by eliminating the incentive. Because once you allow people to express themselves in a wider range, it becomes much harder to put them in boxes and draw just the right district around them so you get just the right number of votes. And if you think about districts like ours that are hard for Democrats to win, like Gloria Witt has my full support, but she knows she's climbing a tough hill this fall. You could imagine if we've got a ranked choice election somewhere down the road, that there's another candidate who's somewhere between John McGuire and Gloria Witt, and there's a lot of space there, who could enter that race and start to be competitive. And right now, we don't see that. We don't see third parties. We don't see independents get in the race because they don't think they can win. They think they'll just split the vote. They'll tip it to somebody who's actually their least favorite candidate. One of the most powerful things that ranked choice voting does is it gets rid of that spoiler effect that scares people out of a race and gets more candidates in the mix.
Okay.
Charles had told me one time before, we were talking about like the music industry, and we were talking about people that go for like the big companies and people that go independent, right? And now like social media, YouTube has opened up to where independent artists can thrive in today's market. When you just made that about there being different people, purple people, green people. So we don't have to be Democratic. We don't have to be Republican. We can be something else and still actually have value in this race. Would that be sort of similar for a person to understand?
Yeah, absolutely. You can think of this as like opening up competition.
Okay.
And making it easier for people to have more choices and to never feel like they have to choose between voting for who they really like and voting for who they think can win. And once we get rid of that spoiler dynamic, then you see more people throw their hat in the race because they've actually got a real shot. And that's right now what I think keeps a lot of candidates on the sidelines is they think, I've got a different perspective. I might have something to offer, but under this current system, there's no way I could win, so why bother?
And this kind of eliminate the write-in vote?
You can still have write-ins with ranked choice. So this paper that we've got in front of us right now, it's got a little cartoon. It doesn't have a write-in space, but you can still have a write-in space on a ranked choice ballot. Yeah, for sure.
Good. All right. Did we not cover something that you wanted to talk about?
Here's all I'll say. If it is September 2024, you have until June 2025 to learn how to fill out your ranked choice ballot. So we got a lot of time. If you're listening to this and you're excited about it and you want to talk more, that's what Ranked Choice Virginia is all about.
Okay.
What we are going to be doing over the year ahead is engaging with as many voters in as many formats as possible. And one of the things that we have learned from our partners in other cities and states is that the best way to teach people about ranked choice is to give them a chance to practice in a setting that has nothing to do with politics.
Okay.
So you get them to go to some place like we were at Civo Sabroso yesterday, the Latin festival, and we were walking around with ballots for people to vote for their favorite taqueria. And so you could say, oh yeah, La Michoacana is my favorite. And then after that, I love Tacos Gomez. And you can pick your favorite restaurant that way. Next month, we're going to be at the Seville Pie Fest, and people will be voting. You know, I like sweet potato first. I like apple second. When people get a chance to vote for things where they're used to having preferences, like what's your favorite ice cream? What's your favorite pizza? Get it out of the red team, blue team framework where people are used to only having two options. And suddenly, once folks see that, they get that they've been ranking things all their life.
Yeah.
They're used to having a favorite and a backup, and that's really all this is about.
All right. Thank you, Sally.
I like it.
Thanks for joining us today. Lots of information.